Zaytuna Knowledge Resource presents an exclusive khutbah, Patience Takes Courage, by Shaykh Hamza Yusuf.
Alhamdulillah, نحمد الله سبحانه وتعالى ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وصلاته وسلامه على من بعث رحمة للعالمين على سيدنا وحبيبنا محمد ابن عبد الله وعلى آله وصحابته ومن تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. الحمد لله، نحمد الله سبحانه وتعالى ونشكره على نعمه التي من علينا ظاهرة وباطنة، ونسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى أن يوفقنا وإياكم لما يحب ويرضاه. أما بعد، فيا عباد الله ويا معشر المسلمين، يقول الله سبحانه وتعالى في القرآن: واستعينوا بالصبر والصلاة وإنها لكبيرة إلا على الخاشعين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, speaking about Bani Israel, that among the things that He told them to do was He told the Jews that they should seek help in prayer and patience. استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة. And then He informed us that this is a very difficult thing. إنها كبيرة لكبيرة إلا على الخاشعين. It is a grievous thing or a difficult thing. شاقة, like the Mufassirun or the people that make commentary on the Quran said, it's a difficult thing on the self to have patience. It's also a difficult thing because some of them say that the pronoun there, إنها وإنها, goes back to al-isti'ana, and some say it goes back to the prayer itself. That the prayer itself is difficult. And some say that the isti'ana, or the seeking help in prayer and in patience, is difficult. And there are other verses in the Quran that would confirm that the meaning is related to isti'ana, that it's difficult for somebody to take help in patience. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about those in the Quran that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ وَعَمِلَ صَالِحًا وَقَالَ إِنَّنِي مِنَ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. He says, who is better in speech than the one who calls to Allah? The Prophet ﷺ and anyone who follows him. And then he says that the Prophet ﷺ, or rather those who call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then say that we are among the Muslims. وَلَا تَسْتَوِيَ الْحَسَنَاتُ وَلَا سَيِّئَةُ إِدْفَعْ بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ. And good deeds are not like bad deeds. They're not equal. You can't equate a good deed with a bad deed. A good deed is much greater than a bad deed. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to repel evil with good. فَإِذَا الَّذِي بَيْنَكَ وَبَيْنَهُ عَدَاوَةٌ كَأَنَّهُ وَلِيٌّ حَمِيمٌ. And you will find that the one who between you and that person is animosity, it's as if he was a good friend. Suddenly, by repelling his wrong with a right, you will find that he becomes like your friend. Now, this is one of the things that the Prophet ﷺ, who is the exemplar, and really is the first and foremost in this verse itself, وَمَنْ أَحْسَنُ قَوْلًا مِمَّنْ دَعَا إِلَى اللَّهِ. Because the Prophet ﷺ is the best of us. The Prophet ﷺ was somebody who was constantly patient with his enemies, people that gave him the worst of times. Once when he gave out some wealth, one of the hypocrites said, this is هذه قسمة لا يراد بها وجه الله. This is a distribution that Allah was not intended by it, saying it about the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet ﷺ was informed of what this man said. In one riwayah, one of the Ansar went to the Prophet and he told him, he actually whispered in his ear. He didn't say it in public. He said the Prophet became distressed to the point where he wished he had not informed him. And he said, قَدْ آذَى مُوسَى أَخِي مُوسَى أَكْثَرَ مِنْ هَذَا فَصَبَرَ. They did those type of things of harm to my brother Moses, and yet he was patient. And the Prophet ﷺ didn't do anything about it. So he himself was the most patient, and he would repel evil with good. This is something that he did, which is why one of his miracles is that he transformed his enemies into his allies. He actually took people that wanted to destroy him, that wanted to eliminate him, that wanted to kill him. There were over 13 assassination attempts on his life. 13. Between poison and other conspiracies to eliminate the Prophet ﷺ. Despite that, even the woman at Khaybar who gave the sheep to poison him, the Prophet ﷺ forgave her. Even though she attempted to kill him. He actually asked her why she did it. Just to find out why she did that. So the Prophet ﷺ was the most patient of those who show patience. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells him in several verses to be patient. وَاصْبِرْ وَمَا صَبْرُكَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. Be patient, and your patience is only through God. وَلَا تَحْزَنْ عَلَيْهِمْ. Don't grieve about all of these things that are happening to you. وَلَا تَكُوا فِي ضَيْقٍ مِمَّا يَمْكُرُونَ. And don't be constricted about their plots. And that's advice from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't be constricted about their plots. In another verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِن تَتَّقُوا إِن تَصْبِرُوا وَتَتَّقُوا لَا يَضُرُّكُمْ كَيْدُهُمْ شَيْئًا. If you have patience, and if you have taqwa, piety, dutiful awareness of your Lord and fulfilling His obligations and avoiding His prohibitions, that you will not be harmed by their plots. This is a promise from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a jumla shartiyah, conditional sentence. That if you do this, God promises you this. If you show patience, and even in the command to show patience, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِنْ عَاقَبْتُمْ فَعَاقِبُوا بِمِثْلِ مَا عُقِبْتُمْ بِهِ وَلَئِنْ صَبَرْتُمْ لَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لِلصَّابِرِينَ. If you should repel justly some harm that has come to you, then do it only to the degree that that harm was done to you, with the condition of justice. In other words, if they mutilated your people, you can't mutilate theirs. So that's with the condition of justice. In other words, don't do what the Jahili Arabs, the Zealot Arabs of the pre-Islamic period did, which is when somebody harmed them, they would actually increase the harm. One of the wise men was once cursed by a man, shatamahu. And he said to him, لا أدخل في حرب غالبها شر من مغلوبها. I'm not going to enter into a war. The victor is worse than the vanquished. In other words, if I curse you, I have to do a better job than what you did to me. So if I win the cursing match, the war of curses, the victor in this war is worse than the vanquished. So I'm not even going to answer or reply, which is called hilm, forbearance, which is a type of patience. In fact, the commentators of the divine names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say the difference between as-sabur wal-halim is that Allah is patient, as-sabur, because He does not punish people immediately when they do their wrongs. But His hilm, or when He's al-halim, is when He actually doesn't punish them because He's forgiven them. But they're related. Patience and forbearance are similar. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about those who call to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you call to Allah, you should know that harm is going to come to you. If harm comes to you, you should know that a good deed is better than an evil deed. In other words, repel evil with good. And you will find that the whole point of your call, which is to win people over to the truth, will be successful. Allah will give you success. Because you're using principles that are divine principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised will be effective. And when you don't use those principles, you will not get the results that you desire. You can get vengeance, but vengeance isn't something where you win people over. You just make more enemies. That's why war is so wretched. Because war, people might go into war, good people. But suddenly the person next to them who's their friend gets his head blown off, and all that person wants to do is blow somebody's head off on the other side. It doesn't matter who it is.